Hey there. Welcome back to another peaceful evening together. Tonight's story takes us to a quiet village and a tall old bell tower where time itself seems to slow. It's the story of Paul, a soft-spoken clockmaker who once loved Anne, the pastor's daughter. Now, at over 60, Paul still climbs the narrow steps of that same tower. And from its little round window, he gazes out at the village below the same view they once shared in secret. Though life moved on, the memories stayed warm, quiet, and deeply cherished. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe. And in the comments, I'd love to hear where you're listening from, or if there's a place from your youth that still lives quietly in your heart, no matter how much time has passed. Now, dim the lights, let the ticking of time fade into calm, and drift with me into tonight's story, where love didn't need to last forever to be remembered forever. The bell tower always smelled of old brass and dust, the kind of dust that clung softly, like memory, and turned golden in the morning light. Paul sat on the narrow bench beneath the window, his hands resting on his knees, a small tool pouch at his side. Outside, the village moved in its usual rhythm carts, rattled along cobblestone streets. A shop bell rang faintly below, and children's laughter echoed near the bakery. But up here, everything was still. Time passed differently in the tower. It didn't rush. It didn't pull. It simply ticked quietly, precisely like the gears Paul had tended most of his life. He was 64 now. Not old, not young, just steady. Like the clocks he repaired, like the tower he loved. The wooden beams above creaked in familiar protest as the bells shifted their weight. He reached out instinctively, running his fingers along the ledge where the sun warmed the stone. And there it was, etched faintly into the sill an A and a P, carved with the corner of a pocket knife more than 40 years ago. Anne. Her name didn't hurt to think about anymore. It hadn't for some time. He said it now, quietly, under his breath. Just once. Like a note held, and then let go. The wind moved through the open window, stirring the dust into soft spirals. Paul watched the air shimmer. The smell of warm metal and pine drifted through the space. He loved this window. It faced the town square, where the church steeple cast its long shadow, where market stalls bloomed in spring and lanterns danced in December. But it was never the view that mattered most. It was the way the light came in, slanting across the stone. Catching the grain in the old wood, he painted golden lines on the wall behind him. She had loved that light. He remembered her standing there, just once, arms folded on the ledge, chin resting on her wrist, hair tumbling forward in waves of auburn and gold. That moment had lasted only a minute, but it lived in him longer than years. Paul breathed in, held it, let it go. He looked at the clock mechanism behind him gears, turning slowly, the pendulum swinging, a low tick echoing through the chamber like a heartbeat. He adjusted one screw on the escapement wheel, not because it needed fixing, but because it made him feel useful. And then he returned to the window, to the town, to the light, and to the memory that never asked for more than to be remembered. He was 17 the first time he saw her. It was late September, the kind of day when the air still held the memory of summer, but the trees were starting to whisper about fall. Paul had been sent to the tower by Mr. Gardner, the aging clockmaker who'd taken him in as an apprentice. Just clean around the gear casing, he'd said. Don't touch the bell cables. So, Paul had climbed the narrow stairs with a tin box in trembling hands, afraid of doing something wrong. He was quiet, then thin and freckled, careful with words, better with tools. The tower felt massive that day. The gears seemed louder, the stones colder. He'd wiped the brass down with cotton cloth and listened to the bell's slow groan each time the hour changed. He had been kneeling near the far corner when he heard the voice. Light, clear, laughter. He turned, and there she was. Anne Fairchild, the pastor's daughter. Everyone knew her bright, bookish, always barefoot in summer. She was 2 years younger, but seemed older somehow. She stood just inside the tower room, where the staircase ended, her hand on the rail, her head tilted. "You're the clock boy," she said. Paul blinked. Well, I guess." She walked in like she belonged there, like she wasn't standing inside a 200-year-old tower where no one ever came. "You can see everything from here," she said, walking toward the window. "The whole square." Her hair caught the light, turning to copper. She leaned on the windowsill, as if it were her favorite place. Paul nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mouth was dry. His heart was not. "Do you come up here every day?" she asked. "Not every day," he said. "When there's work." Anne turned to look at him and smiled. That was it. That was the moment. The one he would remember long after the smell of the tower, long after the shape of the gears faded. The way her smile didn't rush. The way it felt like she saw him, not just as the clock boy, but as a person. They didn't speak long. She asked about the pendulum. He explained, faltering, flushed. She asked if it ever got lonely up there. He had shrugged. "Not when I'm busy." She nodded like she understood something more than he said. Then she walked up the stairs and paused. "You should carve your name somewhere," she said. "So, people remember you were here." And then she was gone. Paul had stared at the empty stairwell for a long time before turning back to the tools. That night, just before he packed up, he took out his pocket knife and carved a P into the sill. He left space for something next to it. He didn't know what. Not yet. But the space stayed. He didn't expect to see her again. But 2 days later, while dusting the chime lever, he heard the same soft steps on the stairwell. Anne appeared, this time holding 2 small apples in her hands. "One for you," she said, offering one. "Clockmakers need lunch too." He took it, speechless, the red skin shining in the tower's light. She bit into hers and leaned against the stone wall like it was the most natural thing in the world. They talked more that day. About her school, his work, the pigeons that nested in the belfry, and how the tower always felt a few degrees cooler than the rest of the town. She said she liked it up there. It felt like being in the world, but not of it. Anne didn't ask many questions. She told stories instead, half true, half playful. She said she liked the sound of ticking clocks, how they made everything feel ordered, safe. Paul said nothing, but he understood. Deeply. He asked her what she wanted to be. She said she didn't know yet, but she hoped whatever it was, it would feel like this. Like the moment before the bell rings, she said. All that stillness, all that promise. He didn't know what to say to that, but her words stayed with him. When she left, she ran her finger along the ledge where he'd carved his P and raised an eyebrow. No A? She asked, smirking. His ears burned. He didn't sleep much that night, and the next day, after work, he returned to the tower, even though there was no assignment. He brought his pocket knife again, carved a small, slanted A right beside his. He didn't make it fancy, just close, just enough. Like a secret that didn't need to be hidden, like something shared, quietly. The following week, she came back, and the week after that, they never made a plan. She just arrived, sometimes with apples, sometimes with a book. Once with a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, she split it in half. And always, they sat by the window, looking out at the town that never knew what was unfolding above its rooftops. It became their place. The bell tower, high above the town, where time moved a little slower, and the world didn't expect them to be anything but quiet. Anne came more often in the late afternoons, after choir practice or errands, sometimes with a scrap of paper in her pocket or a poem half memorized. Paul never asked how she got away so easily, being the pastor's daughter. He figured the church had its blind spots, and maybe Anne knew where they were. Sometimes they talked. Other times, they didn't. Silence wasn't heavy between them. It was a kind of music. The soft hum of the gears, the occasional groan of timber. The wind was slipping through cracks in the stone. Anne liked to trace the outlines of the clockworks with her fingertips. She'd ask what each part did, how it moved, how it knew what time it was. Paul would explain with words that never quite captured what he felt. Not just how it worked, but how it lived. Because to him, the clocks were alive. Once, she asked him why clocks tick. Because time needs a sound, he said. She smiled. That's beautiful. He hadn't meant it to be, but when she said it like that, it felt like poetry. They began leaving things for each other. She'd tuck a note behind the window, latch tiny sketches of birds, snippets of song lyrics, once even a candy wrapper with a joke written inside. Paul would leave little wire figurines made from scraps. He bent into shape home was a tiny bicycle, another a rose. They never said they were meeting, but they always did. When the sun began to dip, the window filled with golden light. That was when she looked her most impossible. Backlit, freckled, eyes squinting just slightly in the glow. And Paul always looked away too soon. Not out of shyness, but to protect the moment. Because somehow, without ever touching, without even naming it, they had made something sacred. Something only they knew, and only the ticking clock witnessed. Anne never stayed long. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Just enough time to feel like the tower wasn't entirely forgotten. She'd perch on the bench near the window, legs tucked beneath her, speaking in a voice low enough not to wake the bells. Sometimes she brought a book and read aloud. Paul never said much during those readings, but he listened closely, closer than he ever had in school. Her voice turned every word into something soft, even the difficult ones. She made poetry sound like conversation. She made tragedy sound like memory. One afternoon, she brought a play. Shakespeare. A scene about love and parting. After reading it, she looked up, thoughtful. I don't think love is supposed to last forever, she said. Not every kind, anyway. Paul didn't know what to say. He didn't want to agree, but he didn't want to disagree either. So, he said nothing. Anne didn't seem to mind. The tower, she once told him, made everything feel honest, like you could only speak the truth up there. That scared Paul sometimes. But he kept coming. They never touched. That was part of it, the delicacy. Like they were both holding something fragile between them. Words, looks, pauses. Once, she asked him to show her how the bell mechanism worked. He explained the counterweights, the lever arms, and the way everything had to move together. She listened like it was music. He asked her why she liked coming up there. "Because no one expects anything from me here," she said. "Not even you." That made him smile, because it was true. She didn't owe him anything, and still, she came back. They began to mark time not by clocks, but by the light. Late golden afternoons, dust turning in beams of sun. The first chill of autumn was creeping into the stone floor. Seasons whispered through the tower before the village even noticed them. And always, she was there, once a week, maybe twice. Never promised, never explained, but there. And Paul, without ever saying the words, waited for her. Like winding a clock. Like listening for a chime that came, not by schedule, but by faith. The first snow fell the day she didn't come. Paul noticed right away. The light entered the tower with a paler hue, soft and silvery. It dusted the gears with a faint shimmer and gave the room a hush that didn't feel peaceful, it felt hollow. He tried to focus on adjusting the minute hand mechanism, but his fingers kept wandering to the windowsill. He looked out more than he worked, his eyes scanning the square, the chapel steps, the row of shops. But no Anne. He returned the next day, and the day after that, always at the same hour, always with the same quiet hope. He brought small things to leave, in case she Camilla folded paper crane, a pressed flower, a marble he'd carried since childhood. He placed them on the windowsill like offerings, uncertain if she'd see them or be allowed. It wasn't until the 6th day that he found something in return. A small folded note was tucked between the stone and frame, half hidden by frost. The paper was creased, the ink slightly smudged, but the handwriting was unmistakable, sharp and slanted, quick but deliberate. "I'm okay," it read. "I'm just not allowed to visit for a while. I'll come when I can. Don't forget me." Paul stared at it for a long time before folding it again, very carefully, and tucking it into his coat pocket. He didn't smile, not quite, but the cold in the room no longer felt so bitter. He sat on the bench for a long while that day, not working, not watching the gears, just waiting and remembering. He wondered if she missed the ticking, if she lay in bed at night and counted imaginary seconds, hearing the bell that didn't ring for her. The tower didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was keeping a secret. And Paul, for the first time, realized he wasn't just fixing clocks. He was holding time for someone. It was nearly 3 weeks before she returned. The snow had melted into muddy corners of the square, and the tower smelled of damp stone and oiled brass. Paul had almost convinced himself she wouldn't come back. But then one afternoon, there she was, boots squeaking against the stairwell, scarf crooked around her neck, cheeks flushed from wind. He didn't say anything right away. Neither did she. She just walked in like she always had, sat on the bench beside him, and let out a long breath like she'd been holding it for days. "I missed this," she said. Paul nodded. His throat felt too tight for words. They didn't talk about why she'd been kept away. She didn't offer, and he didn't ask. The silence between them was different, now not empty, but earned. She noticed the little pile on the sill. "You left these?" she asked, lifting the paper crane. He nodded. She smiled small, grateful. "I saved your marble," she said, pulling it from her coat pocket. "I kept it with me." For the first time, she touched his hand. Just a light brush of fingers. But it was enough. "I might have to stop coming soon," she said quietly. "Things are changing." He knew what she meant. No details. Just the feeling that something was ending. "I'm glad it happened," he said. She looked at him. "Me too," her eyes answered. They sat a while longer. When she left that day, she paused at the window, ran her fingers once more along the A and P carved in the sill. "They'll stay here forever, you know." "I hope so," he said. Then she was gone. And though she came back only twice more before spring, Paul never felt the tower empty again. Because some moments don't leave when people do. Some moments echo, like bells. The years passed quietly. Paul stayed in town, finished his apprenticeship with Mr. Gardner, the man who had taught him how to listen to time rather than just read it. Eventually, when the old man retired, Paul took over the shop on the corner of Market Street, the one with ticking walls and dusty windows, where the clocks in the display always ran exactly 2 seconds slow, just as Mr. Gardner had preferred. He never left the village, not really. A few trips to the coast with friends, once to the city for a repair seminar, but nothing that pulled him away for long. He liked the rhythm here, the familiarity, the way the church bell echoed off the same rooftops he had known since boyhood. He was content, or something like it. His days were filled with winding and watching, listening and adjusting. Grandfather clocks, pocket watches, cuckoo clocks, carriage clocks, each with their own heartbeat. People brought them in like family heirlooms or forgotten promises, and Paul treated them all with the same gentle reverence. He began to recognize time not in hours but in sound. The tick of a French mantel clock was different from the pulse of a Swiss pocket piece. He could hear when a minute was wrong, sense when a spring needed rest. He lived alone, but he was not lonely. His company was time, and the tower. The bell tower remained a place of stillness. He maintained it as a volunteer no one else knew the mechanism the way he did. He oiled the joints, checked the tension cables, listened to the tower breathe with age. Sometimes he'd climb the stairs not to work, but to sit by the window. The one where light streamed in at just the right angle during the golden hour. The one with the faint scratches A and still etched in the stone, worn smooth but never gone. Anne never returned in the way stories often pretend they do. She didn't walk back into town with a suitcase in hand. Didn't step into a shop asking for a repair. Didn't write. But she never truly left either. She lived in the quiet things. In the way the afternoon sun warmed the gears. In the way the clock tower creaked in winter. In the way certain melodies made his hands pause mid-wind. He heard she married a teacher in a town 3 villages over. He heard they had children. He didn't mourn it. He didn't feel betrayed. He simply folded the news into the quiet part of his heart, reserved for things too sacred to explain. Because he had come to believe something true. Some love doesn't last forever, but that doesn't mean it fades. Some love lingers not in fire, but in warmth. Not in words, but in memory. And that was enough. Paul's life unfolded in minutes. Not years, not milestones, minutes. It wasn't that he disliked celebrations or holiday. She simply measured time differently. He remembered people not by dates, but by the tempo of conversations, the quiet between their sentences, the way their footsteps landed on the wood floor of his shop. There were other women, occasionally, kind, well-meaning. One or two he might have even loved in a smaller way. But something in him always paused like a clock missing one tooth on the gear. Nothing quite turned the way it had that winter in the tower. Nothing ticked the same. He never compared. He never said so. But when the bells rang on quiet mornings, and the sky looked like it did all those years ago, he remembered. Not with regret, just with rhythm. Because Anne had become a part of how he experienced the world. She was there in the stillness between chimes, in the golden stripes of light across his workbench, in the way he sometimes hummed a song without knowing why. He didn't write about her, didn't tell anyone, but he kept every note she left him, folded and hidden inside a hollowed-out book behind the shop's back wall, along with the marble, the candy wrapper, the paper crane, its wings now yellowed and delicate as onion skin. He never opened the box often, but knowing it was there gave him a quiet peace, like knowing time still moved, even when you weren't watching it. Paul aged the way you'd expect a man of his habits to age calmly, predictably. He wore the same coat for 20 years. He had the same breakfast every morning: toast, marmalade, one egg. He walked the same path to the tower, even when he didn't need to, because it anchored him, because it reminded him that time, though fleeting, was not unkind. Time had given him one perfect season. It hadn't given him more, but it had given him enough. And what Paul learned, what he believed, as surely as he trusted the swing of a pendulum, was this: a moment, held fully, is worth more than a lifetime half-lived. The morning was cold, not biting, not cruel, just cold in the way late autumn always was: soft gray light, the smell of wet leaves, and the crisp hush that made everything feel a little closer to stillness. Paul stood at the base of the bell tower, gloved hands in his coat pockets, head tilted up toward the window that had framed so much of his life. He hadn't climbed those stairs in nearly a year, not because he couldn't, but because he hadn't felt the pull. He still visited the square most mornings, still opened the shop twice a week, still wound the same clocks. But lately, the tower had felt quiet, even from the outside, like it was waiting for something. Today, he understood what he was waiting for. He opened the door, the old hinges groaning their usual protest, and stepped inside. The air greeted him like an old friend: cold stone, warm brass, and a trace of dust that never quite left the beams. The walls smelled the same. The sound of his boots echoed the same. He climbed slowly. Each step felt different now, as if the stairs had gotten steeper, though he knew they hadn't. His legs ached, his knees protested, but still he climbed. He paused at the landing where the tower narrowed, resting a hand on the railing, and smiled faintly. The same crack in the stone, the same knot in the wooden beam. The tower hadn't changed. When he reached the top, the light was waiting for him. It poured through the window in long golden lines, touching the wall, the bench, the edge of the old bell housing. It looked just as it had the first time Anne walked into the tower, soft and warm and steady. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He crossed the room slowly, sat down on the same bench he had sat on for decades, and placed his hands gently on his lap. The room breathed around him, warm despite the season. It wasn't a memory he was chasing. It wasn't a ghost. It was present. The presence of time, of stillness, of something sacred that needed no explanation. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the tick of the tower clock, to the sound of the wind through the window, to the silence that wasn't empty, but full. And for the first time in many weeks, he let himself feel everything. The years, the minutes, the love. He stayed there for a while, watching the village shift slowly below him. Children crossed the square, bundled in scarves, their laughter rising faintly through the crisp morning air. A delivery cart rattled by the bakery. Someone lit a fire nearby. He could see the faint ribbon of smoke rising and curling into the sky. Bells from the chapel down the street chimed the hour, and somewhere, a door creaked open. It was all so wonderfully ordinary, and yet, it felt like a ceremony. Paul reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Its edges were worn, the ink faded, but the words still lived there, clear as the day they were written. I'm okay. I'll come when I can. Don't forget me. He had read it many times over the years. He knew every curve of her handwriting, every hesitation where her pen had paused. But today, he read it again, slowly, like it was being spoken aloud. Then, with steady fingers, he set the note on the windowsill beside their initials. P and A. Still there. Still together. He didn't need more. You never became a memory, he whispered. You were always a rhythm. He wasn't talking to the past. He was speaking to the air, to the silence that filled the tower like light, to the quiet part of him that had always known Anne was not someone to be held, but someone to be remembered. He looked at the floor where golden light painted soft shadows. He looked at the gears, still moving as they had for decades, and he listened to the sound of his breath, to the beat of his heart, to the time that didn't rush him. You were the bell, he said softly. You rang through me. He leaned back against the wall, hands folded in his lap, and he smiled not because he had found closure, but because he had never needed it. It had always been enough. The bell rang once in the distance. Low, slow, steady. He closed his eyes. Not to sleep, just to be still. And in that stillness, the sound remained soft and eternal, like love that asked for nothing, like time gently kept. The light faded slowly from the tower. Outside, the village softened into evening. Lamps flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The wind settled into stillness, rustling the last dry leaves clinging to trees. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. The rooftops deepened into shadow, blue and gray and gold. And above it all, the bell tower stood silent, watching, steady. Inside, Paul sat on the bench by the window, just as he always had. Eyes closed, shoulders relaxed. His hands rested on his lap. The stone behind him was cool and familiar. The scent of brass and wood oil lingered in the quiet air. He wasn't thinking of anything in particular. Not her name, not the years, just the sound. The sound of time moving softly. The slow pulse of gears and pendulum. The whisper of wind through the upper beams. The hush of a room that had held more than just our sit, had held silence, and secrets, and seasons. He opened his eyes. The light had turned amber, then dim. The last edge of sun glowed faintly through the window, warming the initials carved so long ago, P and A still there, still side by side. He reached out and touched the windowsill, not to trace the letters, just to feel the stone. Solid, steady, still here. He leaned back again and let his eyes close for the last time that day. The sounds outside faded, shutters closing, distant footsteps, a child's voice carried on the breeze. Then, only the tower remained, and the clock, and his breath. Tick, tick, tick. He let each sound move through him, like a wave rolling gently toward shore. And with each breath, he drifted a little deeper, not into memory, but into stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when everything has been said not aloud, but in presence, in time shared, in space honored, in love that didn't need more than what had been. Outside, the stars began to appear. One, then another, then 100. The chapel bell rang once in the distance, low, soft, not to mark time, but to soothe it. Inside the tower, the silence settled in beside him, not empty, but full of everything that had ever mattered, full of warmth, of rhythm, of light. And Paul? He didn't move. He didn't need to. He was already exactly where he needed to be. Not remembering, not waiting, just resting, in the tower, with the clocks, with time, with love that never asked to be anything more than one quiet, sacred note, still echoing, even now. Some stories don't end with grand declarations or sweeping farewells. Some simply fade like light across a windowsill, like the final chime of a bell. Paul's story was never one of urgency. It was one of presence, of stillness, of a single season held quietly in the heart and carried gently through time. He didn't live in regret. He lived in rhythm. He didn't chase what was never meant to stay. He simply honored it every day, with every tick of the clock, with every visit to the tower, with every quiet breath that came from remembering something beautiful. And in doing so, he built a life not of longing, but of depth, not of noise, but of harmony. Time never took Anne from him, because she had always lived in the spaces between the seconds in the slant of the afternoon sun, in the shape of silence, in the carved initials still waiting at the window. And that's where she remained, not as a shadow, but as a light. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story brought you peace, if it reminded you of something soft and true within yourself, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your favorite moment in the comments below. And now, may you find your own quiet tower, your own steady rhythm, your own golden window. Good night.